Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Meaningful Conversations. My name's Asha Anderson, and today I'm here with my good friend Barbara Belger and another good friend Ursula Edgington. Welcome to you both. We are doing a follow-up from our conversation on mass formation, and I think that conversation really opened up so many different topics and really got us thinking within the New Zealand context. So I think today our conversation will be based around, a follow-on from that, some observations since then, and maybe some questions that have arisen. And really, we're taking a bit of a surface, maybe a bit of a deep dive into the paradigm shift that's happening within our society, globally and locally here in New Zealand, and how our societies are dealing with it, and what this means for people. So before we get started, I would like to just maybe share a little bit about each of us. So my name's Asha Anderson, and I live up here in the beautiful Bay of Islands, in the far north of Aotearoa, New Zealand. I am an environmentalist at heart. I'm a people advocate. I love people. I love communities. I do a lot of work based around positive transition during this time. What are we shifting towards? We know what we're moving away, and we know a lot of the changes we need to make. And how can we actually start building that new place that we want to be living in? How can we start building those parallel systems that are going to help us take huge steps away from the old paradigm, which is crumbling, so that's an exciting time. And while it's a scary time, I'm trying to step into the excitement with all those people that are aware of what's going on. And so that's where I'm coming from. And I'm also a real strong advocate, I think, for people who have been harmed by chemical poisons. And this is something that we have seen a lot of here in New Zealand. We have a terrible legacy of use of toxic chemicals, and a lot of the impacts of those have been not acknowledged and have been swept under the carpet. So I'll post some links in regards to the People's Inquiry, which both Ursula and I are involved in, which is collecting the stories of people who have been harmed and sharing those, and creating a platform where that knowledge and awareness can be shared out to the people of this country and beyond, because that is an area that we need some drastic change in. So that's me. Barbara, would you like to just briefly introduce yourself and your amazing expertise?
Shall I go next? So my name is Barbara Belger, or in English pronunciation, that's Belger. I grew up as an environmentalist, and my first ever time I voted was for Green. Green was green back then. That's how old I was. That's how old I am. I think Green is going through a terrible shadow part of their green ideology. I also live in the beautiful Bay of Islands, not far from where Asha is, and currently I'm visiting Christchurch because I came down for the birth of my second grandson. Yay!
Yay!
I made it on the day. Fantastic. I am a local coordinator for our Whangaroa Kerikeri Time Bank, and I'm passionate about that concept of time banking. I work as a health consultant and also have a business as a coach. And my background is, I call it that it's a trauma-informed resilience coaching. And I have been researching trauma and the impact of trauma on the human mind I'm passionate about that for 20 years nearly, and the book still needs to be written. I got very much into seeing it firsthand, the lack of resilience or the impact of trauma when I lived down here during the Christchurch earthquakes. So we received government contracts to create trauma, to help people through trauma. I think it was like almost for a whole year we had the contract. And that gave me complete different insights on the impact it has on health and mental health, on the whole family system. And of course, in the meantime, books like Stephen Porges' Polyvagal Theory, and Gabor Mate just launched a new book, The New Myth of, or the Myth of Normal. It's just become more and more evident that it has such a huge impact on people's even disorders, neurological, mental disorders, and narcissism, and all these underlying qualities, I think, that form the base of what we talked about last time, which is, why are people more prone to narcissistic behavior or falling into the trap of totalitarianism, and others not? And I'm forever curious about that. And one thing that stands out in the hundreds of thousands of people I've worked with is there's a lack of empathy, a lack of self-compassion, a lack of empathy in a traumatized person. And that only comes online when their nervous system regulates and starts to learn how to self-regulate. And then everything changes, literally everything changes, relationships and with self and others. So that is where I come from. I think that's all. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you.
Ursula?
Yeah, I come at it from a slightly different angle. Asha and I connected really because I never thought of myself as an environmentalist until I moved to New Zealand 9 years ago and was absolutely shocked by the widespread malarial and other poisonings. My idea that it was one of the reasons why we're talking about today, because Big Pharma and Big Chem use the same playbook as they've used on little old New Zealand for 65 years, in terms of the censorship, the alienation, the defamation, the denigration, you name it. Anybody who speaks up against the political narrative, whatever that narrative is, has faced consequences. And me personally, I've experienced that, and it's not pleasant, and it is traumatic. And that's definitely something that I'd like to pick up on, Barbara, in a moment, about the trauma that we're all experiencing in different ways, and how we can help each other through that trauma. So yeah, I'm an educationalist by trade. Adult education is my specialism, and I used sociological stroke psychoanalysis type frameworks when I was looking at analysing quality of adult education, actually in a UK context, something that is sadly lacking in the New Zealand education sectors. And that transformative that transformative way that learning can help people is intrinsically connected to nature and our environment. And I'm a firm believer that getting out there, doing it, as they say here, can transform people's lives. And all kinds of learning can be incorporated into those experiences, experiential learning, whether it's something I'm doing at the moment, beekeeping, or growing vegetables and learning about soil health, and different ways of using fertilizers and staying away from those poisons that we were just talking about. It all adds to our holistic health and intrinsically connected to our mental well-being and those around us. So that's probably where I sit at the moment, and I'm a bit lost in terms of what's happened lately. I do a bit of teaching, a bit of writing. During lockdown, I did an online master's in law, which was an interesting experience at the University of Auckland. So I've got lots of different strings to my bow, as they say, and so I'm very multidisciplinary in terms of my approach. And I know something all three of us share is our overseas experience, which really, adds to the depth of the sorts of conversations that we can have by comparing and contrasting our own experiences overseas with this kind of you know, political narrative that we're fighting against. Also, family we're trying to help, and different ways to do that. So yeah, looking forward to having a bit of a chat about the current situation in New Zealand, and what we can, hopefully what we can do to help people through this difficult period of time.
Excellent. Thank you, Ursula. Yeah, I mean, going back to trauma, you know, trauma really can be a learning vehicle, you know, if we are able to recognize it and let it and move through it. But right now there's so much, I think, deep trauma and hurt, you know, from what's happened over the last few years, and still so much, I think, psychological, you know, torment, and people are very lost. And I think coming away from our last conversation about mass formation, and then the subsequent notes that you sent through to us, Ursula, you know, around emotional labor, really got me thinking around peer pressure, and that the whole culture of peer pressure, and the pressure that comes, you know, from just living alongside other people in a society, and the expectations that we put on each other, and how that really can push people to step away from their authentic selves, to actually step away from their integrity and just follow through on what the job is. And I think that's something that we've seen, you know, a lot of people going through. Should I keep my job, or should I, you know, can I actually walk away from my job into something new, or am I being shuffled, you know, and am I kind of remaining in that box? And I think so many people have had to remain in that box, you know, and what kind of harm, I mean, some of the questions you raised around what kind of harm that actually does to a person, to actually not be able to follow through on what they really truly feel. That was something that really stood out to me, but it's something also I think we actually see across the board in life.
Yeah.
Well, it is with trauma, if I can just jump in there, with an unregulated or dysregulated, unregulated nerve, how you feel. You just simply don't know. I mean, literally, you feel pain, and even going slightly into sad instantly turns into fight flight, which is anger. And you know, that's where I had, now that I'm down here, I've got had very lovely, you know, longer conversations with my both sons. And when we moved here from Hong Kong, they came out of I can share a bit of private thing. They spent all their lives in Asia, in private international schools, and Asia, you both know, Asian mentality is gentler, is more caring. I don't know, it's very different and more respectful. And I don't know. So they didn't know real life. And when they came here to you know, that they kept saying now, they were surprised how people behave. And my one son told me at the middle school, he had 1 year in middle school before high school. And he said, and I made friends, and it was interesting. And one of my mates during break just hit me on the head, and he turned right. You're a friend. No, you don't do that to friends. And so that that is, well, hurt people. So that's a kind of learned behavior. That is an unregulated nervous system. That really is your hippocampus, your amygdala. You're just like everything firing in the wrong ways. And at times, I feel it would take forever. I thought before COVID, I thought in the one-on-one work with people that, you know, I'd get somewhere, that every person having an insight into their own nervous system and ways to regulate. would then be able to pass on to others, you know. So my idea was always creating world peace. I said to every client, I said, I've got a very small goal for you, if I can say. You'll become my movement, part of my movement for world peace. You know, that's a small goal only. But then, you know, this whole, and we were thrown into a realization of how unsovereign people are, and how dependent, and how quickly they would be happy to jump on the drama triangle and become a victim and be guided. And this whole, like we said, you know, mass formation, it's still such an interesting topic, lady. I still think it's just amazing, and the different cultures, how they reacted differently. So, but yes, I'm looking forward to hearing what your thoughts are on New Zealand and mass formation and mass psychosis.
So coming back to the, you know, one of the concepts that I've looked at in some detail is this concept of emotional labor, where basically, as I described in my little note that I sent you both, the performance, you know, we're all actors on a stage, and so when we go to work, we put on this face and we pretend to be what we're paid to be, you know. And the tension is really between to what extent that person that we're paid to be is our authentic self, you know. And that's what, for me, that's what teaching is all about, is because 9 times out of 10 in New Zealand, at least, in my current situation, I can pretty much be my authentic self as I build rapport with my adult students, find out what motivates them, and help them to reach their true potential in whatever sector that is. Obviously within the restrictions of the funding or the course curriculum or whatever it might be. But there's always compromises. So the issue that has been explained in terms of the emotional labour of the COVID problem is that the healthcare workers were expected to behave in a certain way, like, you know, with the PPE and not touching their patients, and same with students, you know, we had to keep physical distance and all that. And so there was an element that they may not have agreed with, because they knew that it wasn't based on any scientific, you know, research. It was just an arbitrary rule that they had to stick by. And so that conflict was even more exaggerated, because they were perceived as having to perform something that went against all of their ethical principles, you know, a bit like maybe how a conscientious objector during the war, you know, would have to potentially go out and kill somebody, you know, that was against their moral principle, their whole fibre of their being. And so, yeah, whereas emotional labour is normally perceived to be about positive emotions, you know, having empathy, building rapport, caring for your patients, investigating the needs of your students and how best they learn, etc. You know, this other kind of emotional labour is a performativity which has got quite sinister, you know, context. It's something that nobody really understood. It was irrational, you know, as we talked before we started recording, Barbara, about how lots of academics, in inverted commas, you know, have gone along with the political narrative, basically trying, you know, their minds go in circles trying to. So by forcing somebody to take my other device offline, by forcing somebody to perform in a way that is not only inauthentic but also harmful to others, raises a different kind of emotional labour. And somebody, Barbara, is that a concept you've come across before?
Yeah. Terms and looking into the terms, and then that's not my strength. I just look at, and you know, when clients, the I'd like to hear more about moral injury. What comes to mind is we're talking about the age of data, and the healthcare worker, the archetypal teacher, the archetypal caring person. Those qualities that were drawing these people to their jobs, they were exactly harvested to turn everything round, because it's absolutely so clever. Of course we're caring, and of course we don't want to, endanger grandmother or our neighbor or our, like even in the hospital here where the baby was born. Of course I don't want the babies from dying from whatever this virus is, the RS something virus. And so the whole appeal was to really lovely human qualities. And because, again, coming back to trauma, if I'm not aware that this is a human quality that goes up and down depending on how regulated I am and my nervous system is, I don't know about these qualities. I know that I should be feeling like that, and I can train to be like that, but am I really just observing myself in a dissociated place? Or am I really feeling this? Am I really standing there in awe with tears in my eyes because it's just all so beautiful, like when a baby is born, for example, and somebody traumatized and unhealed trauma and unregulated nerves just simply doesn't know. And those qualities, I just have, I don't want to say they, but somebody who put all this plan into action was really very well aware of that, and also about the geographics of that, and which society and which country is in what kind of level of development or consciousness, and how to use and how to apply it, and how to create a perfect marketing plan for it. I don't see any other way to explain it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, definitely there's a weight in New Zealand that's unique, simply because salaries, for instance, have been kept so low. There's a vast community of people who are skilled migrants without permanent residency, who happen to be in those vocational type jobs, a lot of them.
yes.
And so they're very dependent upon the approval and compliance issue of the government narrative. So yeah, it's a different kind of pressure
Yes.
here, because in the UK my friends often talk about, well, that we're on the treadmill, we've got our mortgages to pay, we get in the car, we travel an hour or more to commute to work, and an hour or more back, and we go to bed and we wake up and we do the same again, and there's this endless kind of non-questioning of the everyday, the normalization of work being the central focus of your whole being, and that's what sets New Zealand apart for me. I think there's a lot of people who, rightly or wrongly, don't prioritize work. They, as I think we talked about a little bit before, the sort of feedback attitude. You can see it here, where on a Friday people will be out mowing their lawns and sitting outside the pub and all the rest of it. That's just the way New Zealand is.
I think that's a fundamental part of what this country has represented, which is a strong attachment to the recreational side of life, enjoying life, to quality of life. However, that's just been so well eroded over time, that's, I mean, it's still there, but it's different now. And I think that's, and I actually think a lot of people who have migrated to this country were attracted to it for that reason, because there's this perception, and rightly so, but it's a really is a slide of history, because we've changed so much that you come here for the quality of life and for enjoyment of the great outdoors, and to get a better balance of all of that, that work life balance, but it's we've followed suit, I think, with the rest of the modern Western world, where we have got into those patterns, and people living in cities are stuck on that treadmill now, and that has been normalized here. But there are, we still do have lots of strong rural communities where that connection to the land and and those other values are still very, very present. I think it was really interesting what you mentioned, Ursula, about the skilled migrants being dependent on approval. And I think I've seen that a lot, within our bureaucracy and within our government institutions, that they're hiring people who won't question because they are in that position, that vulnerable position. And other industries within this country as well, but particularly you see a lot of people working in bureaucratic positions in government who are just willing to, toe the line and stamp the paper and bullshit jobs. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, plenty of those have been created here. And that's what helps to keep, to keep at bay, I guess, the transformation that needs to happen, and keep all of the issues under the carpet, because you've got people that are just wanting that approval and who are worried about losing their position here.
Yeah, definitely.
Big one, and the way things are developing, that may well become even worse for more people, if really the whole economic change will depend on, let's say, a basic income, or a universal basic income, and then that's that becoming a handout from the government, then everyone will fall into this dependency and pressure, and then the social credit score system isn't far away because of I think, and this is what concerns me a little bit, our young people, how the digital world is so close, and digital learning and brain-wise what it does to people, the more, I think humans are fantastic. I just love them, and I think we're wonderful. So the more I think we can cope with digital, and I'm sure we're going to have a visual digital part of our brain, just like the auditory digital part came online much later, the self-reflecting part of the brain. And so, but the more we have these different areas of our brain evolving, the more heart we need, the more emphasis on heart learning. So yes, do whatever you need to do in a learning environment, and school, preschool, but do the mindfulness exercises and the heart focused stuff, and then our evolution can't be stopped, I think. And we don't need an implant in the brain to be still mastering the computer world as well. But, sorry, I sidetracked a little bit on my own tangent.
I missed a little bit of what was said a bit earlier because I think the internet cut out, but I'm not sure. But I want to go back to the health workers and the fact that their whole training and their whole professional career is within this rigid framework, with arbitrary rules, and a lot of those rules are absolutely necessary because the quality and the reliability of the service, has to be there. But it also creates that environment where they can't question, and where they are trapped. So when these mandates and when this whole vaccine rollout, was happening, the narrative was so strong and apparently so backed up with so much expertise, global expertise, not just within this country, that the moral guilt on them to not do that was so great. So the conflict that many of them must have felt, because becomes your whole persona, it becomes that professional identity that you were talking about, Ursula. You in a sense have to walk away from that when it becomes so difficult, to actually stay in alignment and stay in integrity. And so I can imagine, you know, the discernment required to do that, and the courage required to either walk away, you know, or the trauma to stay, you know, the ongoing trauma of actually staying within that and continuing to defend it, because those people become the face of it. They are the people enacting it, you know. I just imagine that there's so much trauma within that community and conflict within that community at this time. You know, I really feel for a lot of those people. I mean, how are they going to make it through, and how are they going to answer to themselves about what's happened?
Yeah, I think my own writing about the tall poppy syndrome in New Zealand kind of played into what happened with the mandates, because in some sense there were already people that were disengaged from their toxic workplaces. You know, they might have been skilled migrants, or other kinds of highly educated, experienced people, and because of this tall poppy syndrome of, you know, you will be beaten down and victimized and bullied and harassed until you shut up, and partly because of this bullshit jobs, you know, thing, where there's no doubt that there's far too many public servants, as we've mentioned in our last conversation, far too many public servants who wouldn't even know what that word servant means. Public servant, you know, they don't view themselves as a public servant. That's half the problem. So far too many public servants, low salaries, high levels of personal debt, feed into this toxic tall poppy syndrome. So already, even before the COVID came along, there were many people working who never really engaged with that professional identity. It just wasn't possible for them to obtain it. And in actual fact, as you pointed out rightly, Asha, New Zealand gives us a get out clause, because let's be honest, people don't want necessarily to have a professional identity. You know, they want a better quality of life for their families. And so, yeah, you know, let's just give up on trying to fight the system, fight the big machinery, and let's instead go for an easier option, and that leads to compliance, and that in turn leads to what we've seen unfolding over the last 2 years. Very, very sad.
Yes. What I have a question for you both. Yeah. What gives you hope about New Zealand? I mean, I feel there's some very unique aspects to this country. Perhaps not, definitely not how the whole the whole pandemic was handled, because that was a very manicured, very planned, very contrived narrative and handling of that entire situation. But the deeper aspects to the people of this country, and you know, in terms of sovereignty, you know, do you hold hope for how things might evolve here?
I've got something burning on my tongue here.
Go for it.
We have so one of my training backgrounds is in neurolinguistic psychology and neurolinguistic programming, which got a bit of a bad rep in the pandemic, because you can use it to the absolute detriment of people, unfortunately.
Safe and effective.
That's right.
Yes.
And but also it is I think it is a wonderful tool to actually because linguistics makes part of how we think, our thoughts, our physiology, our behavior eventually, right? But that we'll can get into that another time. But where it is, we have in NLP, we have a few presuppositions, we call them, you know, what forms people's meta programs. And one of them is that in order for a person to do a problem, they can only do it if they already have all the resources. And that answers your question, Asha. Our New Zealanders, the typical Kiwi, has all the resources. They have the natural kindness. They have the caring for your neighbor and she'll be all right attitude. And those are all qualities, again, like we said before, were turned round and used to form this narrative. But if we manage to remind New Zealanders and everyone who's been attracted to New Zealand, there was an attraction that brought us here as immigrants, including in my case, Maori culture, indigenous culture has been fascinating for me. And so if we manage to remind people of that deep down, it's not the superficial, let's now just have whatever, I'm not going to go into politics here, but just really remind people of how deeply they care for the land, how deeply they are connected to the land and belong to the land, you know, not the other way around. And I remember being part of a study, just again after the earthquakes, and I just shared my own observation from the time that I've been traveling to New Zealand, how, you know, if you look at the old state houses, there were no fences in between. There were maybe a little hedge or something. And then there was a little bit of a wall built, the next generation housing, then a little bit higher wall. And now you've got very, you know, big houses, no space in between. And you know, there's a standard height, I think 180 or something, high wall or fence in between. Like, you know, keep everybody away and everybody separated because the other means danger or whatever. So that's been a conditioning that's been happening. But I believe if we, like we probably all do, and like we do in our videos here, you know, if we manage to remind people of those qualities and tap into it and into the deep caring and meaningful encounters, and it doesn't have to be you know, the weekly piss up at the pub on Saturday after a rugby match. It doesn't have to be like that. There are other ways. And that conditioning, I think we have to somehow at least make people aware. And once they have this awareness, then there is hope.
Yeah.
But I'm looking forward to hearing what you say, Ursula.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you've just said, Barbara. I think there is a lot of hope for, you know, I mean, in terms of the housing, that's definitely that sort of urbanization of rural life, you know, has been rejected in lots of other parts of the world. People just don't want to live in those kinds of houses. You know, they want the freedom of space to, even if they, you know, aren't growing their own vegetables, they certainly want some space around them. And when I see these city subdevelopments where, as you say, you've got like 6 houses on what would be one section, where one house has just been demolished or something, is not good for anybody's mental health. So that will probably evolve now, I reckon, in the coming economic recession, where people are seeking, you know, a better quality of life, even if it is a more humble way of living. In terms of the culture, I think something that really gives us hope for New Zealand dealing with the trauma that we've all experienced is this, we laughed about it when we first got here, my husband and I, this habit that New Zealanders have of using anecdotes rather than science or research or data or whatever. Somehow anecdotal stories have got much more, you know, authenticity and meaning for New Zealanders who maybe, you know, I mean, educational levels of educational outcomes here are relatively low compared to other OECD countries. So, and we know from behavioural science how effective personal stories are. That's definitely one way. You know, if you look at that reachingpeople.net website that we talked about last time we had a conversation, you know, that people don't want to hear the data. If you're going to help them to wake up to what's happening, definitely personal anecdotes are the way forward to reach people. So that's definitely a positive. And in these rural communities, as you say, Barbara, people connecting, you know, in farming or gardening, swap shops, or, you know, whatever, garage sales or whatever sort of personal interactions they have, that is a way of life that can't be taken away.
Yeah, cool. I feel, I was born in New Zealand, but left when I was around 5 and then came back at about the age of 16. So that in between period, I was in Australia. So I spent a lot of my childhood over there. So I kind of had to relearn what New Zealand was when I came back. And I think, and then since then, some of my adulthood has also been spent overseas, and of course, always returning to New Zealand and spending, considerable amounts of time here. I think I've learned a lot in terms of the depth of people, particularly in rural communities, and particularly in Maori communities, and the connection that they have to each other. And I feel I've seen that there's a golden thread of independence. People are quite fiery and quite staunch about protecting their own independence and their sovereignty, their independence of thought, their independence of access to the land in which they live. And this is kind of like, I suppose it's a tension that's developed over time between the Crown, between Māori, between settlers, and then immigrants that have come later. And with the passing of the Queen, and the transition that's happening, I think there's going to be quite a bit of reshuffling. That's the sense that I get. And yeah, I just feel there's this burning desire. There's this very, very present consciousness, not throughout the whole of the country, but it's a core, of people who are here for this place and are not attached and tethered to the Crown and to the government. They have this independent burning within them, and I feel that is something that will grow in this country. We'll have to see how things go with the Crown, but I think we're at a turning point. I hope we're at a turning point, where we actually start to mature in ourselves as a country. So that's something that I'm hopeful about. And I don't know what the future holds, but I feel that we're grounded in that here in this place. And I think it's something that a lot of people relate to. And even the people who have migrated here, many of them have fled from very difficult situations, and others have just left their home country for various reasons, but they've come here for a purpose, and to connect with that. And so that's something that really gives me hope, and I think it's very strong up here in the north.
Yes.
And although we're seeing kind of, I feel like that there's the Crown is influencing people in different ways. It's become a lot more sophisticated in how they actually get people to partner with them and assimilate in a sense. But there's still this underlying very, very strong tethering to what New Zealand is about.
Yeah. You've just reminded me, Asha, of the time when we first arrived. Well, I first arrived. My husband had been here for a few months, but 9 years ago when I arrived, and we'd bought a house here, but obviously, like many families, the container was still on the high seas with all of our worldly possessions in it. And it was going to be, a couple of months before it caught up with us. So we moved into this house literally with suitcases, and new jobs to start on Monday, and didn't know anybody, didn't have any family here or anything. And the wonderful generosity of the neighbours that we didn't know, they tapped on our door, they gave us baskets of kai, they gave us you need a sofa, I've got a spare sofa in my garage, you can borrow that, here's a spare fridge, here's a bed, basically our whole house was kitted out with donations.
Wow.
From our very generous neighbours, and without that, I don't think, well, there's no way that those first few months of a whole new life would have been as exciting and enjoyable as they were. You know, those halcyon days of a honeymoon, of arriving in a in a different country and different culture, and how wonderful it was. But that, I think, really for me epitomizes the generosity and the authenticity. You know, going back to the emotional labor issue, you know, these people weren't, we had nothing, you know, there wasn't anything for them to gain. There wasn't anything there other than literally their genuine generosity of helping somebody who they saw was in need. That's the sort of thing that New Zealand will, they might have lost touch with it temporarily, a lot of people, but that is the true New Zealander spirit that helps us through the coming problems.
I think it was orchestrated to lose touch of it, you know, by all the a little bit worldwide, and maybe a little bit worldwide, especially in the English-speaking countries. You know, the war on drugs, the war on terrorism, the war on, is always, wow, I've got to be distrusting somebody, something, and that is a conditioning. But I think we can all come back into it, and that's something, Asha, you and I touched on in another conversation. Speaking of the crown, and I grew up in Germany largely, so you know, we have beautiful castles, but monarchy is a long way, and we just have no attachment to any of that. But I was married to an English man for 17 years, and so spent quite a lot of time in the UK, and I was fascinated of what the Queen represented, and anyway, so now that's just my thought. With the crown, or with the archetypal queen passing, and the queen as an archetype, queen, emperor, king, are sovereigns. And I think for hundreds and thousands of years, the archetype sovereign has been represented by monarchs.
Yeah.
But now maybe we are called to actually all of us step into our sovereignty, all of us step into our divinity to a certain extent, but certainly into our sovereignty, and not wait for the doctor to tell me whether I'm sick or not, or a teacher to tell me what I should have in my brain or not, or the government tell me whether I live well or not. You know, it's not from the outside, it's within us. And this, I think it will be a huge, big learning process, but the situational invitation that's there, I think this is a very good time to step into that, and not make it yet another political movement, you know, the sovereignty movement or common law, whatever, all these, you know, concepts that are out there. Really step into sovereignty. The tendency is always, like I was talking to some common law people, the tendency is always to step, wow, and there's this person and he's leading this group and that's where we're meeting, and yet they're back into another follower kind of non-sovereign situation. Anyway, I think we lost. Oh no, you're still there. I thought you were frozen.
I'm just making a note of that, Barbara, because I think that's a really important point what you've just said about the symbolic nature of sovereignty, and how we need to reclaim it. I mean, that's something that Indigenous peoples all over the world have, you know, that's where the tension is really, isn't it? Is reclaiming their own sovereignty. So
and the symbolism also, you know, with our spirituality, that's been hijacked by religious dogma, and again, sovereignty, that's been hijacked by monarchies around the world and whatever, for, you know, hundreds, thousands of years, and now that's over. Reclaim our spirituality that we are, reclaim our sovereignty that we are, and then we can live peace. I don't have to be afraid and have defense forces, you know, and defending against what? There's no fear.
Yeah.
And then there's no fear, there's no corruption, and hey, easy, in 1 hour we solved it, and here we have world peace.
Well, I think that's a good note to finish on. And Barbara and Ursula, instead of the Great Reset, we have the Great Reclamation of our spirituality and our sovereignty, you know, and our responsibility towards each other and our ability to build communities and just find ways to get along.
Daily exercises to practice your sovereignty, daily exercises, because it comes with all the, you know, if you look up archetype sovereign, it has a shadow side, but even be aware of that shadow side, and then I think the world will be great. I mean, that was just my latest, you know, the last few weeks I've been thinking about that since the passing of the Queen.
Yes, me too. Me too. Me too. And that's when you step into your sovereignty, and we've had discussions about this, I think, in some of our other meaningful conversations. To do it with integrity and authenticity means that you respect other people's sovereignty. So many of the conflicts within society begin to either be resolved by people between each other, or they don't appear because we have that greater level of respect and understanding of our boundaries, of our responsibilities, of our rights, and the same for others. So it's a new territory for us as a collective to move into, but it's an exciting one because it begins to make these other power structures, these old power structures, irrelevant. And you know, and we just need to step into that space.
Yeah, well said, Asha. Definitely.
Yes, and no more, you know, in that sovereignty, there's no more blaming, there's no more drama triangle, and slowly all these personality disorders, a lot of, you know, a large part of that is inherited, and some, you know, is learned behavior through trauma, but they will settle, you know, it's a generational healing. And yeah, so interesting. We're incarnated at perfect times.
Oh, well, thank you both for another awesome conversation. Yeah, I just wish it could go on forever.
Well, I want to know more about the moral injury that you mentioned there, Ursula.
I'll send you some links, and we'll add some bits to the description like we did before, Asha.
That would be great. Yeah, fantastic. Yep, and I'll get this video up as soon as possible, and send me any links. And thank you everyone who listens, and we look forward to following this on with another one sometime soon, because there's so many different interesting topics, I think, and it really pays to reflect and hear each other's opinions and ideas on what's happening in this time and how we can be our best selves and develop a greater understanding. So yeah.
Share it to Matthias Desmet's page. He's really lovely. He's really responsive. He
Yes.
he responds on the messenger, and he's always open to conversations, which is great. Which is not what Breggin does, you know. He's just like my way or the highway.
Brilliant.
Well, enjoy the rest of the week, and we shall connect again soon.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Asha. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Ursula. Thank you, Asha. And we end up exactly at 11:11. How is that for divinity?
Beautiful.
Thank you.